You've got to believe and trust that you've prepared yourself as best as you can. You have the right program. Believe that you can do it and have the confidence. So we talked about this in a podcast the other day. Confidence is an amazing thing.
This podcast is brought to you by Tri-Velo Coaching, where we help triathletes and cyclists like you train smarter to race faster. I'm your host, Jordan Donnelly, and on my left is former Australian Ironman Champion and head coach of Tri-Velo Coaching, Gerard Donnelly. In this episode, we are continuing our series on preparing for an event properly, and today's focus is on the marathon. And Dad, there's nothing we love more than seeing our beloved sport of running grow. And I've had more and more friends reaching out over the last couple of years who have entered a half or full marathon and are looking for guidance. And since the pandemic, it seems more and more people have taken up running. So today we're taking you through how to tackle the monster that is the marathon, how to train properly for it, how to get through the actual race, how to stay uninjured, and much, much more. So Dad, welcome back to another episode.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, one thing the pandemic did do was got people thinking about what things they could do when they had all this time where they weren't going to work, commuting, or working from home or whatever. So yeah, I think there was a bit of a running boom happened due to COVID, which if you can always find a positive out of a negative, well, that was one.
Totally agree. So before we get into the topic, our normal starting segment of the podcast, what are you grateful for this week?
Yep, I had a bit of a think about this one, and I really think it's a little bit of a weird one as normal out of left field. I've really come to realise that, especially over the conversations I've had in the last month, some of them on the podcast actually, about how important the network of support that you as a human being should have, and how vital it is to your well-being. And I'm grateful for the ability for me to have friends and people in our immediate family that I can bounce things off, who can just be there to listen, mainly probably not giving advice, but giving me perspective maybe. And I think you have to be willing to be open and honest about your feelings, and you'll get the appropriate responses. And I think the support network is vital to our everyday well-being and our continued growth as human beings. And I think if you need to think about that yourself and who is that person, and whether it's your coach, and I'm happy to be that person, or whether it's just someone that is your best friend, or you just really need to make sure that you're not keeping things in. And I'm grateful that I've got that many people that I can get that from, and I'm really reaching out to everybody else to make that something that is important in your life. And I think it'll make a world of difference to making you feel better about a situation that you might find yourself in that's uncomfortable, or you're not happy with, or you want some perspective on. So yeah, that's my gratitude.
That's unreal. And I want to talk about that a little bit more. And it kind of ties in with my own gratitude, where I have just finished the last few conversations we've had on the podcast. Just so grateful that we've gotten to have them. And some of our guests have just been overwhelmingly inspiring, thought-provoking. Some of the things that some of our guests have said have been so profound. And I'm just so grateful that we get to have these conversations. We do say this a lot, but because of the podcast, we've been able to access just some really cool people and cool conversations. And the interviews we've had have just been quite special, especially some of the ones over the last month, and have really changed the way I've looked at training balance with life in general. We had Kel O'Brien just on, and he's a young 24-year-old who speaks like a 70-year-old, and just his perspective was just so awesome to hear and so refreshing, and really grateful for the vulnerability that people have to come on our show. And we don't know these people, we meet them, we have a conversation before the podcast, we get to know each other a little bit, and then they're so willing to share their stories on our platform with an audience. So I'm just super grateful for that.
I couldn't agree more. And I just want to add one more thing. I just think I've noticed my generation growing up, it wasn't a thing to say how you felt. It was almost showing your weakness. And I'm just so impressed with the next generation's ability to be willing to just talk about their feelings, and that's quite foreign to our generation. And I just find it so refreshing. And you're right. I've been really highlighted from our podcasting with Jimmy Whelan, with Cal O'Brien, with Lachlan Morton, just guys who are incredible to talk to because they're willing to be vulnerable and talk about how good and bad they're feeling, and being honest and open. And I just think it's just helpful for your everyday well-being.
We haven't actually we've spoken about this a little bit because we do our conversations just in general. We do talk about gratitude and these kind of things off air, not just on air. But my memory growing up, and I don't know if this is just because we were kids and you were the parent, but our level of conversation has definitely shifted from when you're a kid and you're the dad and you set the rules to what it is now. But do you think that's a product of the whole kind of world changing, and do you notice that across all generations, or do you think it's just because this is what the younger generation kind of does? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. I think as a parent, you want to give your children boundaries, so it's harder to be as open to each other. And I think I struggled with that a bit as a parent, being too harsh, but wanting to make sure that you knew where the boundaries were. And I laughed a lot. Your mum and I laughed a lot at how the boundaries were getting pushed and how we were being challenged by you guys. And I definitely learnt that if I could be vulnerable to you, you responded in a better way. And I would always say to you, as an example, I was taking you to a party, and I would say to you, and I did this with your older brother Liam to start with, I'd say, tonight there's going to be alcohol. It's going to be, having a fun time. I hope you have a fun time. You can do what I did and drink too much and make a fool of yourself, or you can just drink enough and enjoy yourself and have a good time. You choose which one you want. And I was just trying to give you perspective because I'd made those mistakes myself and regretted being, acting silly and under the influence of alcohol when I shouldn't have been, doing things that I regretted. They weren't major catastrophes, but stupid things. And I, rather than telling you not to drink as a dictatorship, I wanted to reason with you as to the experiences I'd had to make you think about the choices you were going to make and the consequences. That worked so much better than when I first started with Liam was, I don't want you to drink. And I think I learnt that changing my ways of communication, you all responded so much better.
That's an interesting take, and I think you've used the words, different generation, and you're impressed with the generation of young athletes, and you see it in the footy world as well. There's a lot of footy podcasts out now where a lot of AFL players are coming on and talking with vulnerability, which you wouldn't see from footy players in the, 80s or 90s. And that's a really good point. I didn't want to dive into that too much. It's not a family therapy session, but I was definitely very, very interested. Moving on to our next segment, and in terms of what has caught our attention in the world of triathlon, cycling or running. Dad, what's caught your eye?
Well, there's a lot to catch the eye at the moment, George. It is I don't know, maybe there's 3 or 4 peak periods during a year in sport, and we happen to be focusing on cycling at the moment. We had the World Cross Country Championships recently, and there's just so much stuff happening. When it's an Olympic year or it's a Commonwealth Games year, when the Tour de France is on, when the Giro's on, the Volta and the World Championships of running, and there's just so much happening. But right now we are in the preparation for the big season, the summer season in Europe, which is the Giro, the Tour de France, and the Volta and the World Road Championships. So they're the 4 kind of key things. It's not an Olympic year. So, as we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, the Spring Classics. And so we've got 2 groups of people training for the Spring Classics, and the other group are training for the Giro. So we've got the stage races happening, such as the Torino Adriatica, the Paris-Nice, and now the Volta Catalunya is in Spain, which is an epic race. I just love this race. They couldn't make it any harder if they tried.
Yeah. It's basically just 7 days of climbing.
Well, actually, I think
last stage was a sprint stage, but
stage 4 was it last night? Stage 4, and it was a sprint stage, which Calvin Grove won, which is good for the Aussies, and New Zealand they got third, so first and third, and that's about the only
Caden Grove. Yep,
that's about the only chance they've got of getting a sprint. So, so what I want to say about what's caught my attention on the Volta is the Remco Roglič challenge. Remco Evenepoel and Roglič, he's in the leader's jersey. It's halfway through, so by the time this podcast comes out, it'll be all done, and we'll be able to see who is winning and who is losing. Interestingly, Remco won stage 3, and he threw his arms up in the air, and it was a real well-deserved victory because stage 2 he got rolled on the line by Roglič and the other guy. I've forgotten his name.
And same as stage 1.
Yes, and anyway, it turns out that he had a 2-second gap on Roglič at the end of that mountain stage, but he sat up with his hands in the air. Had he kept driving it through to the finish line, he would have been in the leader's jersey. And the thought crossed my mind was maybe he's not worried about winning this tour, but I doubt that very much. I think he would be wanting to win every race he goes into. Of course, he won the stage. But it just, even the pros, I think he made a mistake. I think he needed to think about the overall race and not just the here and now, and drive it to the line. He only needed one more second because guess what? They're on the same time, and because Roglič has
won 2 stages, always finished better than him.
He's got more finishing places ahead of him, gets the jersey. Just minor stuff like that. I think if he had his time again, he would drive it to the line, then put his hand up. And
I still can't figure out Remco's personality because he's just an animal, and you can just tell that he doesn't want anything else but to win. And when Roglič beat him in stage 1, he was filthy. He was smashing his bike, slamming his hands on the handlebars, and he was so. It was almost like an angry celebration when he won stage 3. He just sat up and he just went, kind of, yes, like I'm the best. It's almost like he feels like he deserves to win, or not even deserves, but he should win. That's the result that should happen. And if anything else other than that happens, he won't have a bar of it. And I almost feel like that was part of his celebration, was he knew he'd won it. He almost like he forgot about the 7-stage race and just said, yes, I'm the best today. I can't figure out his personality. I love him. He's just an animal of a rider. He's amazing to watch. He could be the greatest rider of all time over the next 10 years, but can't figure him out.
Well, what a battle. I mean, Pogacar's not even there. There's so many good riders.
We've spoken a lot about form, and we're going to keep speaking about it all the way to the Giro, because these guys are 6 weeks out. Who's riding well now? Who's going to be riding well in 6 weeks? Because the Volta Catalunya is stacked with every Giro rider. It's, as you're saying, Remco, Roglič, Carapaz, Chavez,
Thomas,
Geraint Thomas, Adam Yates, Mikel Landa. There's even more that I'm forgetting, but Roman Bardet. It's absolutely stacked with some of the best climbers, and so it's amazing to watch. Carapaz is getting spat out the back. Geraint Thomas is absolutely hiding, and he actually just put a tweet out today with a picture of him in the bunch saying, "You will not see me out of here for this race," but he did say, but I've got a longer term vision. So that's him indicating that this isn't his race to be absolutely shining, but it's fascinating to watch unfold.
Yeah, and we have talked about form, and it is a hard thing to hold, and Remco is in unbelievable form, or is this just his normal? Because his form can be better by the time the Giro comes. I'm just unsure, because he's sitting on the front driving it, and Roglič is getting a free ride, and all the commentators are telling us how the tactics are really poor from Remco. But he's got that ability, and he could be using this as a training session to build his form by sitting on the front. And sure, you said earlier, clearly he wants to win. So there's a hard a compromise going on here. I want to win, but I still want to get the training session out of it. Because you could sit in and just snipe the victory, which is absolutely okay. But you've got a big goal as well. The Volta Catalunya is not the Giro. And so we don't know what the underlying thing that's going on with their training and preparations. But it's really riveting to watch, because for someone to sit on the front and then still sprint and ride away, that takes some form to do that against the best riders in the world.
Yeah, it's awesome and that's what makes these races so interesting. One, they're great races, but two, this is awesome for any age group or athlete that is our audience to think about. This is their B race, this is their C race, this is not their A race. So how do they tackle it? And Remco in that stage 3 victory probably had what you'd think is the wrong tactics, where it was him and Roglič were away. Remco was definitely stronger. Roglič was just hanging on to him. And Remco just did basically the entire pull for the last 12 or 15K or whatever it was. And in a race where it's your A race, he probably wouldn't do that, because he probably needed smarter tactics to conserve himself and not let Roglič get a free ride to the end. But maybe because it's a B race, he's doing exactly what you're saying. He's just doing a 12 or 15K effort like he needs to be able to do in the Giro. Doesn't care if Roglič is on his wheel or not. I mean, again, we don't know because we don't have inside access to their exact tactics, but it's fascinating to watch, knowing that this is their B race and it could be a training session for them. But also, it's a professional race and they do want to win. And yeah, it's this funny balance, isn't it?
Yeah, and tactics, you've got form plus tactics. Form's just not the only thing that's going to get you to win. Look at Vingegaard and Pogačar. We could say that Vingegaard won because Pogačar employed poor tactics at the Tour de France last year. Both the form of both riders was at their peak, but the tactics of Vingegaard were substantially better on certain stages, and things that Pogačar did early in stages could have affected him down the track, which was, funnily enough, what we said when we were doing our podcast in the middle of the tour. We were going, well, I don't know if what he did there was a really good idea. Maybe it's going to come and bite him again later on. And we couldn't have been, more exact with that. That was, but form is one thing, and then your ability to read the race is so important. And yeah, it's an intriguing period of sport going on at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely loving it. What's caught my attention is last year I said my standout performance of the year, without a doubt, the number one performance was Sydney Mclaughlin in the hurdles at the World Champs, broke the world record, first woman to go under 51 seconds for the 400-meter hurdles, and I just love this event. The 400-meter hurdles is just epic. Her performance was so good. I spoke about this last year, where the top 3 women in that race are the greatest 3 400-meter women hurdlers of all time. They've all been running the fastest times of all time. It's unfortunate for second and third, which is Delilah Muhammad and Femke Bol, that they're competing against Sydney Mclaughlin, because without her there, they would be running 2 of the fastest times ever. But she has just dominated. And in this race, she beat them by 10, 12 meters, a second or just over a second. In just a dominating performance, and that I can't understate that enough, how these are the 3 best runners the 400-meter hurdles have ever had, and she was that far clear of Femke and Delilah. But what caught my attention was World Athletics just released a video of her rewatching the race for the first time in 6 months or whatever, and she's reacting to how the race unfolded, and she's commentating on what she was thinking throughout the entire thing. And she talks about how she hits the last 100 and she's starting to stumble, and she is so far clear of everyone, and she runs with such perfect form. She looks like she's gliding, but in her head, she's saying, don't fall, because her legs are that heavy. She feels like she's going to fall over. She said she only just made it over the last 2 hurdles. She really thought she might hit them. And the last 40 meters, she just thought any step now, she's going to fall over because her legs were so heavy. And she broke the world record. One of the most incredible times. It was 50.68. And then she lays on the ground for 10 minutes. And she said everyone was wondering why I didn't do a lap of honor or something. She said I couldn't move. I had lactic in every single cell of my body. And she said, honestly, looking back, I'm really proud of it. But she said it also terrifies me because I'm really scared of going through that pain again, because that was just the hardest race I've ever done. And that was such an eye-opener to me that, that's what you think about these professional athletes. And a lot of people looked at her and just said, she's unbeatable. She's just so dominant. It's easy for her. Whereas in her head, it was the most painful and hard race she's ever done. And she's literally scared to give it a go. She hasn't done a big A race since then. She's obviously had an off season, now building up again for this season. But To hear her kind of say that was kind of refreshing, to be honest, because we've spoken a lot about on the podcast about anxiety before a race and stress before a race, and a lot of that comes from focusing on what kind of outcome you're going to get. But I definitely resonate with what Sydney said in that sometimes the nerves come from going, I know how much this is going to hurt, and that's kind of scary, you know? And so it's a good thing to be aware of, and it's a good thing to work on in yourself and go, all right, I know it's going to hurt, but I'm willing and ready to go up for this battle. And you really have to psych yourself up. And it's this arousal scale of going, this is going to be a tough day. And whether it's a 400-meter hurdle event or a marathon, you're going, I'm about to go to war with this event. And I've got to be ready for this. And no doubt that when she comes to her next A race, she'll be ready for it. But for now, when she's sitting in the comfort of her lounge room watching this race, it's an uncomfortable feeling to think about. But I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, a really good point. It made me think of Cathy Freeman in 2000, 400 metre, not the hurdles, but the 400 metre flat. And obviously, when she finished that race, it was interesting watching her body language. I still remember, and it's 23 years ago. I expected her to be over the moon, and she was maybe 5 or 10 minutes later. But it looked to me like relief was the first feeling that she was having, and exhaustion, the two things that you've just talked about there. The weight of expectation she had on her would have been incredible. You know, people expecting her to do what she did. And I think those people who are the favourites all the time have that. And that would be a hard burden to carry, I reckon, because people are expecting you to perform, you know, thinking about Pogačar and Roglič and those guys as cyclists. You know, the expectation is they perform, and if they have a bad day, everybody's going, what's wrong? What happened? What's wrong with you? And that's hard to deal with in itself. And, you know, if you start breaking world records like Sydney Mclaughlin has done, and over the years as runners, you know, we look at Ingebrigtsen, you know, every time he races, the expectation is that he wins. And that's not easy. And so therefore you have to be very careful about how much you can cope with and what races you should be doing. And at the same time, you don't want to be limited by weight of expectation. So therefore, I think it comes back to what we've been talking about in a podcast a lot, is your love of your sport will override all of that. And if you just love racing, training, competing, you shouldn't give a shit about expectation. And if you have a bad day, and there's a few athletes who are good at this, and I think Roglič is quite good at it, because there's some races he's had such crap luck, and some of it's his poor bike handling skills or whatever, but he's had so many races where he's crashing and chasing, and he still smiles and doesn't blame anybody, and, you know, and his expectation is that he should win all the time, and but he's got a great attitude that I just love doing this, and some days I'll win and some days I won't. Sagan was brilliant at this, absolutely brilliant at it. Anybody who's won 3 back-to-back world titles as a cyclist, you've got to have a pretty good personality, good mindset, and he just loved riding his bike. And so I think that one of the things I'm learning over my journey in interviewing people and watching sport, rather than being at the top end of it now, is how the love of whatever you're doing is almost the winning formula. You can have a great program, and that, you know, obviously that's going to contribute enormously to how you perform and your form of the day. But your actual mindset about, I don't care what happens today, I just love what I'm doing. I'm so grateful that I'm a part of this, and I just think that's the thing that'll get you further than. And so that example you just gave then, you realise how hard the actual event is when you hear someone say that. But when you look at it, it looks like they're doing it so fluently, so easily, and that's what's the mark of a good athlete, is that they make it look easy. You know, you look at Djokovic serve, or any sport you're looking at, you just see them do it so fluently, you know, effortlessly. Ingebrigtsen, when he's just attacks, you know, he's hurting. Everybody forgets that. It's hard. When Pogačar attacks the group on the last climb, it looks like, he could do that. But you go on a climb and try and do that with your mates. it takes all of your mind and physical attributes to push the pedals for 10 seconds harder, So yeah, it's a great example of what's caught your attention, but there's a lot to learn from the mindset for sure.
Totally agree. Let's get into the topic that everyone wants to hear for this episode, and that's how to prepare for a marathon properly. And I want you, Dad, to start off by describing just what the marathon event is and what makes up the marathon and what makes it so tough.
The history of marathon's ironic, obviously, because the true meaning of the marathon was the Greek runner sending a message, which happened to be 26 miles. His message had to be sent. And so that was how the marathon started. So I think the irony of that is the pressure of that message to get to the finish or get his message delivered as fast as he could. And that's kind of what a marathon is. You're trying to get from start to finish as fast as you can. But because it's got such endurance in it, it's hard you just want to give your best right from the start. But unless you pace it, you're going to be destroyed. You're not going to get the outcome you want. You're going to be slower than you want. So the marathon is the most unique event where pacing is key. And if you fuck that up, the whole race is destroyed. And it's absolute suicide to do anything other than that. And we've said many times, the shorter the event, the less the hardship or the pain you're going to endure. The longer the event, you muck it up, and that pain and hardship you're going to endure is ingrained in your brain because you're out there enduring that pain that you've mucked up. And I think that my description is you have to respect this more than anything that you ever do. And whether it was 50K or 41 or 47 wouldn't matter. It's just that it is 42.2. And it is a distance and a time that, we've got someone doing it in 2 hours, and we've got the majority of people doing it in 3 hours 30. So we've got a huge range of time spent out there, and all the guys who do it in 2 hours, 2 hours 10, 2 hours 20, whenever you ask them, they go, I don't know if I could run for 3 hours 30. I take my hat off to the person who's doing that. So that kind
up to 5 hours plus.
Yeah, and that kind of puts it in perspective, doesn't it? The marathon is just one of those unique events that is so tough, and you can get it wrong so easily. And yet to get it right just takes some really simple, good planning and preparation.
So before we dive into what specifically you need to do, what is your experience personally of the marathon, being able to get your time down to 2:31 or 2:32 for a PB? What was your experience training and racing and getting through the mental toughness that it requires?
I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I'm going to tell it on air now, and I'm not proud of this one, but I was a reasonably good runner growing up as a middle distance runner, and I kind of liked the endurance sport, but I still loved as a junior running 800 and 1500 meters. But the marathon always attracted me, and I couldn't wait to do it. But my dad always said you need to be a lot older and a lot more mature to be able to withstand the load that marathon requires. And I'm so happy that was the advice I got. By the time I got to run a marathon, I'd run so many 10Ks, 5Ks, half marathons, and not really done the correct marathon training. But I was so fit for half marathon, I just presumed wrongly that it would transfer across the marathon. And a couple of things on the day that went against me, which really didn't help, but I think I was on track to run a reasonably good first. I think I did 7 or 8 marathons in a triathlon, and I did, after my triathlon career was over, I decided to have a crack at marathon running properly. And so I had a 3-year plan to try and run around 2:30s. If I could run sub 2:30, that would be my goal. Anyway, on that journey, I'd done, I think, a preparation run, a half marathon, and I remember we were at Nunawading Swimming Pool. The race had finished there, and I was with a few mates, and we'd all done the half marathon together. And I think I ran a 1:12, and I was on track for I just wanted to run my first run. It's 2:48. I wanted to run 4-minute K pace. That was my plan. and it was my first marathon, so I didn't want to, I had 2 or 3 years to get down to where I wanted to, and I had a really good idea of what I was capable of doing, and saying to the guys in the pool, if I can't run under 3 hours with that half marathon I've just done, I'm giving up running. And they all laughed. I thought, of course you will. You just run a 1:12. That equates to basically a 2:44 or 2:45. Anyway, I was on track for 4-minute K pace, and the event I chose was the Frankston to Melbourne local race here in Victoria. And unfortunately, some days you have a northerly, so it's a headwind the whole 42.2K.
It's one direction. So brutal.
From point A to point B is not out and back, so it's very annoying if you've got a headwind, and great if you get a typical Melbourne forecast, which is a southwesterly, which is basically a tailwind the whole way. But this time, here it is, it's a headwind northerly. And so tactical running in the pack was really important to try and hide getting a draft, etc. I'm taking too long with this, sorry, but
that's good.
But anyway, I got to I think it was 36K, and I had a group of my mates who weren't runners, and they had set up a card table and eskies, and they were just watching the race at Elwood, just near Luna Park, for those of you who know it. And they had an esky with ice and their beers and stuff, and they saw me coming and they were jumping up and down. It was actually pretty inspiring coming up to them, and it was really hot that day. And as I came up to them, I was totally on target. I only had 6K to go, and I should have run that in 24 minutes, and I would achieve my 2:48. I was probably at 2:47 pace, and they picked up their ice bucket and chucked it over the top of my head and drenched me with cold iced water. And in the next 2 kilometres, I had full body cramp to a point where I couldn't actually move, and I was stationary. And I did everything I could to keep walking. And it wasn't my poor pacing, it wasn't my nutrition. I probably hadn't done quite enough long endurance runs, but I was pretty well on target for what I wanted to do. But just the change in my body temperature from going from a really warm body temperature to totally immersed in ice was too much of a shock, and I got cramp. And as you know, we get cramp in our family at the drop of a hat. So any changes in body temperature are going to do that. Plus when you've done already, 2 hours 30 of running. And it took all of my mental resilience to get to the finish line. I'm not joking. I basically took, from that point, I think it was another 38 minutes to get to the finish line. I could see the clock 2 hours 58, 2 hours 59, and I still wasn't within 100 metres, and it went 3 hours. And I finished in 3 hours and 15 seconds. And that sentence I said at Nunawading Pool about, if I can't break 3 hours for the marathon,
haunted you.
Came back to, and that's kind of what a marathon, program. You're going to have good, bad, and indifferent results on your preparation. And my experience was that was an unbelievably good thing to happen, because it gave me respect for the event. And I thought about my training. I thought about the ice getting thrown on me, my strategy, my execution. All those things come into doubt, and I had to work through them all. And clearly, looking back, I've decided that it was the change of temperature in my body that caused me that problem, and I was doing a lot of other things quite well. And then my next marathon I did, I was no problems with sub 2:40, and then the next time I did it. The program went well, and I ended up doing the low 2:30s, which is what I wanted to do. So I wanted to tell that story because it is a journey, and it takes layer upon layer of experiences to get the right outcome. And as we said, those preparation years were my B races, my C races, for the big day. And of course, I did the same event, Frankston to Melbourne, all 3 years. And all 3 years we had a headwind, and the course doesn't do that anymore. It doesn't go from Frankston to Melbourne. It starts and finishes basically at the MCG, which is a much more pleasant way to do it, and it sort of snakes its way around the suburbs of Melbourne. So it's got lots of headwind, tailwind, crosswind. So it's a different type of race now. So looking back, that time I did into a headwind, it was probably like a 2:26 or 2:27, but I just got over 2:30. But I was so satisfied with everything that went along with the journey, and it was a great feeling to, I was I don't know, 16th in the race or 20th in the race. I don't know where I was, some in the top 20 somewhere. But the standard of that race is not like an international race. We might have one or two good runners. I think Bill Shorten's come and done it in 2:10 or 2:12, and a lot of local good runners have done 2:8s and 2:10s and 2:12s, but it's not 2:4s, 2:2s type of runner. So, the position was irrelevant to me. It was all about the performance, and I've had really good experience at having a crack at that, and really enjoyed that period away from triathlon. But it certainly taught me a lot about making sure that you do the right preparation over the right time to get yourself into the position you want to be in.
And I guess that entire story leads into the first principle of a marathon training plan, and that is your goal for the race depicts your training plan. Because if you're a runner like yourself, you might have set a 1 to 3 year plan of doing multiple marathons to get your time down, because you have a lot to learn. Whereas some people want to tick it off as a bucket list item, so they're only doing one, and if they make mistakes on that one, it's bad luck. That's the one they want to do. So talk us through this first principle of when someone says, "Oh, I'm doing a marathon, how do I prepare?" And the first question you ask is, "Well, what's the goal for the marathon?"
Yeah, and the second question I use is, "How long have you been doing it? What's your history?" And then I can say, well, this goal that you've selected, once I understand your ability and your history of running, I can say that goal's spot on for you, or that goal is nowhere near your ability. You've got no chance. You got no chance for that date. You need more time. So I'll never say you've got no chance, full stop. I would always say you've got no chance for that particular date. It's too soon. You don't have enough time for that. You need to rethink your goal race day to another date. And give yourself more opportunity. So I think that's the key. Is your training plan will only be able to help you for your current form. If your current form is 6 months of running, then that's got limited ability, because your aerobic capacity takes years, and if you want to improve that significantly, then you just need to give yourself the right time. So I think that's the key thing. So you're right. Your actual race goal, in terms of how close it is and the time you want to do, is totally related to your history as a runner and the aerobic fitness that you bring to the table right now.
That is the typical traveller conservative answer, which we love, but also what gives an amateur runner or a new runner that wants to do a marathon, or a new-ish runner wants to do a marathon, a lot of hope, is the principle of diminishing returns, meaning you will get the greatest improvement at that when you're newer to the sport. And so a lot of runners will find that if they could do a 6-month running program, 24 weeks long, with proper progression, not too much overload to the point where their body's breaking down, they will feel like a different person at the end of the 24 weeks. You will feel so much fitter than you've ever felt in your life. And that's really exciting. That's a really cool part of a proper training plan if you give yourself enough time.
Yep. And we've got to remember that, as you said earlier, when you posed the question, it could just be a one-off thing. We hope that it's not. My desire is that once people fall in love, and you've heard this already in this podcast, once you love what you're doing, I want you to make it your lifelong journey, is to keep doing these things. And I don't mean just keep doing the same race. I just mean keep running, or keep riding, or keep triathloning, or keep swimming, whatever your passion is. Just don't make it a one goal thing. Make it part of your everyday life. And it will help you in all sorts of things in your work life and your family life. We talked about that. But certainly I think that if you're just going to pick one event, one box ticking event like a marathon, you can do it. Whether you could run 42.2K, whether you had 4 weeks training or whether you had 6 months or 6 years. That's the answer. You can get there. But it's the level of the experience that is going to either, if you give yourself 4 weeks to do a marathon, you're going to have a lot of pain in that day. Right from the start. You might get away with 5Ks being comfortable, but for the next 36, you're going to be very uncomfortable. But you'll get there. So I want to make that clear. We're just trying to give you the best outcome with the right structure to enable you to enjoy the thing, because I think in life, if you do something that's unenjoyable, you are highly unlikely to go back and revisit it.
It's funny because it's just always an answer that people don't expect. They say, oh, just give me a training plan. Like, don't talk about all this crap about, loving the event and respecting the event and understanding what your goals are. Like, just tell me what to do. And we're saying, well, no, that's just totally the wrong way to go about it. And if you've decided to do the marathon, these are the things that you have to understand about the event. These are the things you have to understand about this challenge that you're about to undertake. And I guess I want you to keep going down that path of what are the requirements of the race that you want people to understand.
Yeah, well, the first one is you need the time to do the training, and I don't mean general, I mean the training session that's key, which is your endurance preparation. So you've got to allow in your weekly schedule that you would possibly be running at some point in that training plan up to close to the time it's going to take you for the event. So if you're going to do 5 hours for the marathon, then you need to be prepared that at some point you're going to be running close to that time. I don't mean the distance, I mean close to that time when you go out for your training run. And that's not what you do in week one. For those who have listened to the program, that's very obvious. For those who have never listened to the program, progressive overload is our key thing, which is start slow and build. And so if you're thinking that 5 hours is your time that you're aiming for, or 3 hours 30, or 2 hours 40, then you need to be training at some point towards the end of your program at that training time. So starting off at an hour and a half might be the longest you've ever run. And by the time, if you're a 3 hour 30 runner, by the time you get to marathon day, you will have run somewhere around 3 hours, 3 hours 20, somewhere in that training session. So that is the key requirement that you need to have in your mind before you start the program. And the other sessions are basically just continuing to keep the consistency going in your running, so that you're building an aerobic capacity to absorb the load. But the key session is the endurance run, and everything around that is contributing to recovering from that and then getting ready for it.
And how long is too long for that run? Let's say you're predicted to run between 4 and 5 hours. Are you realistically asking someone to get to the point where they run for 4 hours on a Saturday or Sunday as a training run?
It's a great question, because when I'm coaching people to ultra 100Ks or further, when I say to them that, if you're going to take 12 hours for that event, we need to be doing some days where we're actually out there for 8 hours. And I just get silence on the other side of the phone. And oh yeah, and that sounds easy to roll off your tongue, but the run can be broken up into many ways. We can do a split run where we might do 2 or 3 hour run in the morning, and then the afternoon, when you've only had really small time of recovery, you might build up to an hour in the afternoon to an hour and a half to 2 hours. So already you've got 5 hour, 6 hour run in one day. And then, once or twice in that build up, in that 6 month period, you might do a day where you do 6 or 7 or 8 hours where you're walk running. You might be in the mountains somewhere where you're on trails where you can't actually run, and you're, climbing up steep slopes where you have to walk. So it's more like an excursion than a training session, really, because we're just not running fast. We're just out there for time on our feet that's going to replicate the event.
And I do see sometimes, or a lot of the time, programs do depict these endurance runs on distance instead of time. And could you explain why that's a mistake?
Yeah, because if you took the marathon as an example, when you get to your peak form, you're going to run X pace. In training, because we don't want to have such fatigue build up. And remember what happens after the marathon. You are exhausted because you've run at your peak pace for 42K, and you've built your form up, you've tapered, and this is a one-off event. And it takes you probably a week or 2 or 3 to really recover from. So if we were to say to everybody, we want you to run 42K on your long run, or 36 or 30 at your race pace, then you would take so long to recover you wouldn't train. So we're just going to get the body used to the time factor first, the time of the event that you're going to take, and don't have the intensity as a factor. So remember, we always talk about frequency of training, duration of training, and intensity of training. So the frequency is the key. So if you train too hard, then you're going to lose the frequency, which is consistency of lining up each day for a session. So we've got to cut the intensity down for our endurance run so that we can back up again week in, week out, so that we can get the right amount of load into our body come to our race day. So the minute you try and run those long runs too hard, you're going to need more time to recover, which means it's going to cut into your frequency, which is the key to all programs. So the minute you drop your frequency of training, which is consistency, which is lining up day after day and having a day off here or there, or a recovery day here and there in your program, that's going to get you to race day 10% better than you would be if you had not trained so hard in those endurance runs. We can get the intensity from other areas, but that's not the day we want to do it. But, in some of the endurance runs over the 6 months, we would ask you to do, your own half marathon at race pace, or your own 30K at race pace, or your own 36K at race pace as a test. But that's not a week in, week out thing. That's something that happens every 4 to 6 weeks in your program.
And I guess you're not also really has to say that you're not trying to get to the point where you're running, let's say you're going to be a 4-hour runner. You build up to that 4-hour mark. You're not going to do that for a month straight. You're not going to build up to that 4-hour mark and then do 4 weeks in a row of 4 hours. It's probably, once you get to that longest distance of what you're going to run for your endurance run, that's probably a one-off. That's once you get there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that, for me, generally should be 6 weeks out from your main event. You should be doing your longest time run 6 weeks out. And then from that lead in, you've basically got 5 more weeks, and one of the weeks is the race. So you've only got 4 weekends from 6 weeks out. You've got the 6 week out run, 4 weeks of training, and then the race. So you've got 4 weeks where you're totally reducing the duration and then slightly increasing the intensity. So you start to run less distance, and then you start to pick up, that 6 week race ready period, we call it, where you're starting to replicate the paces for shorter times that you're going to run on race day. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, for sure. And that immediately leads us to the progression question, which is how long should the program go for, and how quick is too quick to progress through your long run? Because the point you've just made there is you want to be getting to that goal length of your longest endurance run 6 weeks out. So if you work backwards from whatever that goal run is, again, we're using the 4-hour example, to where you are now, maybe your longest run ever is an hour, you need to be able to week by week build up from an hour to 4 hours and finish there 6 weeks out. So you need to allow enough time for that build. And let's say you increase 10 or 15 minutes per week in terms of your long run, which is a general progression. 15 minutes is maybe pushing it, depending on the person. That's going to take you 18 weeks worth, potentially, of progression to get to that point 6 weeks out. So that's kind of giving you a time frame working backwards of how fast you should be progressing.
Yeah, well, you're almost answering your own question, but the bottom line is the longer time you give yourself, the more opportunity you have to progress slower. And the rushed progression risks injury. And if you want to take shortcuts, you know what's going to happen. Your risk factor goes up exponentially. You are going to, run the gauntlet of possibly overtraining, overstraining, and then what happens? Frequency, which is consistency, disappears, and you're worse off come race day. So yes, the simple answer is give yourself more time than you think. It's never too late. As I said earlier, 6 weeks out for that particular style of preparation. If you've only given yourself 12 weeks, well, that doesn't give you much time, but you can still do it. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, that's not achievable. You can run a marathon in, if you had to, with 2 weeks training, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're being sensible.
this is just what's ideal. And you could almost look at what's ideal and then what do you actually have now? Because you might go, oh, crap, I signed up for this marathon 16 weeks away, and now they're telling me I need minimum 24 weeks. Well, now you have to decide, okay, where can I try and meet in the middle here? Where can I look for ideal but realize I don't have enough time? So try and find that medium patch. And one point I would like to make is I have seen a lot of programs where they do progress people quite quickly in terms of total volume per week. And so you have to look at what the amount of Ks you're running per week. And people might start at 25 Ks, then it's quickly 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, up to 90. And I just look at any beginner runner trying to run over 60 kilometers a week consecutively. You know, we train full time as runners, as triathletes, and in our coaching group, and my own example, stringing together consecutive 60 kilometer plus weeks is really tough, and my body takes a long time to adjust to that. And I've been running for 28 years, and so for a beginner runner to expect their body to be able to cope with that is asking a lot. So you have to be really aware of that. And I don't like seeing a program that progresses that fast and then expects a novice runner to be able to do 60K this week, 70K the week after, 80K the week after that, because they're trying to get that volume in. I just don't think that's safe.
Well, that was the next point that I was going to raise, is the program going forward is always dependent on what you've done previous. And so what you've done previous is you've been a runner for 4 weeks previously, or you've been a runner for 40 years, or you've been somewhere in between 4 weeks and 40 years. So that will determine how quickly you can progress. If you've been a runner all your life and you come onto a program like this, you would only need probably sometimes the minimum of 8 weeks, because you've already been doing the volume required and you've got the necessary aerobic fitness. All you need is some fine tuning from someone who knows what they're doing, and you've got your race ready period to get yourself to the goal you want to do. And that's a classic example of people who want to join the program and they're already runners. But the person you're isolating there is the new person, the novice, and there's not a lot of people in that position who would try to do a marathon straight away. So we're talking about a very minor group of people. And so the majority of athletes out there who are runners, you are coming to the table already quite well prepared. Your pre-season's been done, whether it's 3 years or 10 years of running or a year's worth of running. You're still ahead of the person who's a novice. So the novice, their aim should be a 5K park run. That's how conservative we are. And then you progress to a 10K and a half marathon. And then if you're still in love with running, then your big goal is the marathon down the track. So being sensible and making these goals around the bar at the pub is great to do, but just because the other 6 guys have said, yeah, I'm going to do a marathon and it's in 6 weeks' time, that's probably not the right outcome for you if you haven't been running at all. And so that's kind of what we're trying to differentiate between all sorts of abilities and levels, and historic relevance is the key to the answers that you're asking.
And I want to bring it back to frequency now, because you spoke about all the sessions around that endurance run, and the rest of the week is quite important to get right. And so we've had many athletes aim for that elusive sub 3 hour mark. So I want you to give an example of how often they were training, what their frequency was like, versus some athletes who are somewhere between that 3 hour and 3 hour 30 mark, who maybe didn't have time or weren't as experienced to train as frequently, but they could still get away with 3 to 4 sessions a week. So talk us through the frequency side.
Yep, and don't forget, the people in the world who have run under 3 hours, I think, is less than 5% of all marathon runners. So we're talking, again, a really small amount of people. And if they can run, 4:15 pace, I think, is what gets you under 3 hours. 4:12, I think it might be. I should know that because we had Daniel Byrne do 3 hours and 30 seconds, 3 hours and 20 seconds, and then 2 hours and 58 minutes. So I know that 4:12 or 4:13 is the pace you need to run for breaking 3 hours. So that group of people, they are probably already running 5 out of 7 days minimum. And that's why, as a professional cyclist or a professional runner, you've got this huge aerobic base that enables you to knock out 60 to 100k a week, or as a bike rider 400 to 600k a week, or 20 to 30 hours, because your body is totally adjusted to that load. So if you're someone who's a 3 hour 30 runner, you probably still might be in that category that you've been able to run consistently 5 days a week. And someone who's not done any of that and is a 4 hour runner, they would probably struggle with 3 to 4 sessions per week. And therefore, you need to be very clever. And the obvious answer, which is cross training. So, getting yourself to do some stuff where if you can possibly swim or jump on a bike and do some easy riding, and it has to be all easy where you're not trashing your legs, because we're trying to get off our legs. That's why swimming's such a good thing to do. You're still getting some cardio, still breathing with your head in the water. You're still blood flowing around. What are we trying to do on our recovery days? We're trying to repair the damaged muscles from our running. And the best way to do that is just to get light blood flow. And, we know blood carries oxygen, which repairs working and damaged muscles. So we want to continue that happening. Going for a walk is easily as good a thing to do, as long as you've got some movement, where there's a little bit of blood flow above sitting still. So it's important that five sessions is kind of the optimum, I think, over the journey from everybody that I've had go through the program and my own running. And even then, I didn't run 7 days a week. I was doing other sessions, and making sure that I just I wasn't running myself into the ground by just running 7 days a week, 6 months at a time and having a day off here and there. From running, the more recovery you can do, and this yourself, you are a better athlete when you're fresher, but you still need to get your body used to load, and that's what training is, preparing you for the load that's going to happen on race day. And there's a fine line between doing way too much and doing enough to get you to the result you want. And each person is going to react differently, and that's the hard part. From a coaching point of view, because one program doesn't fit everybody. The 5 sessions that I give you, I might have to adjust the intensity of those. The 5 sessions are clear, some tempo, some recovery, some endurance, some strength, and some race-like pace. They're basically the 5 sessions, but the intensity of all of those sessions might need to be adjusted if you're not coping.
Can you give us an example snapshot of a training week of potentially just a quick example of what those sessions actually mean? What is a tempo, a race-like session, interval session, a recovery, a steady state session? What do they all specifically mean, and how do they fit into a week?
Yeah, so let's just concentrate on marathon training for this. So our endurance run, for a start, we've probably talked about that a lot.
Covered that.
So it's all the strength work in the hills, running to time, and making sure that you're not running too hard and you're keeping yourself as much as you can in zone 2, where the duration is the key component of the day, and strength is the second thing, and keeping your heart rate down, so that you're not trashed, so you can't front up 2 days later for your next run if it's a Sunday. So there is a recovery run which is helpful to do if you're a person who's running Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday or Saturday, and there's your 5 days. So it depends on how your schedule is for the week. And that determines where we put the recovery. So if you're only able to do 5 runs and they're Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, straight away our recovery days or our cross-training days are Monday, Friday. So what are we doing in those days? We're just doing for a light spin or a walk or a swim. So you've got the understanding that zone 1, that's all you have to worry about. So therefore, if that's going to be our schedule, and this is just a hypothetical example, so if we're going to run Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm unhappy with that because it's not giving you much recovery. So the Wednesday has to be your easy day. So if you're going to run with some sort of change in pace, remember, marathon pace, if you're running, we know that if you're a 3 hour runner, you're going to run 4 hours 12. If you're 2:48, you're going to run 4 hours. If you're a 3 hour 30, you're going to run 450, some pace, something like that, et cetera, et cetera. So knowing those paces is what we're going to determine our intensity around, working backwards from your marathon actual goal pace. So our Tuesday and our Thursday, we would be trying to do something where we're running slightly better than our marathon pace, because we've already got a day endurance where we're running way slower than our marathon pace. And so, we always talk about specificity, don't we? Well, why would you do a training program where you never run at your marathon pace? You need to have that somewhere. So we would try to do recovery runs where we're actually running slower. We would try to do some sort of zone 2 sub-threshold, which is just below your marathon pace, or something about threshold going into VO2, which is just above. So we're getting the body used to everything that could happen on the day. And obviously we're doing it for reasons, because sometimes we want to practice more threshold running because that's where I'm weak, more strength running, that's where I've got no abilities to sustain when I get tired. The stronger you are, you can hold the pace when you are strong at the back end of a marathon, because you've got the strength from the hills. And if you don't do any of that sort of stuff, you find that you fade every time. And that could be the exact reason why you fade, because you just don't have the strength and endurance to hold that pace. So we need to do sessions similar to that. So that's why we would throw in hill repeats. We would have some tempo runs, which are kind of that sub-threshold where it's between 75 and 90% of your threshold pace. And those sort of sessions are really good, because they're going to give you the pace that you're going to feel similar to on race day. And I'm not talking about the training session as relationship to your marathon pace. I'm talking about your threshold pace here. So the sub-threshold is your threshold pace for your best 10K, your best 1 hour. So just understand the difference there. We've got our marathon pace
is going to be a percentage of that threshold.
Yes, that's right. So we've got our marathon pace, which is also a percentage of our threshold. It might be 75% of your threshold pace on the day of your best 1 hour. So we're going to do some sessions that are just under that threshold pace, which is still above your marathon pace. And we're going to do some sessions that are over your threshold pace, which is way above your marathon pace. But we're also going to do some sessions that are bang on your marathon pace, so that your body gets a totally attuned and adjusted to what it feels like to run at the examples I gave, 450 or 4 minute K pace or 412. And in some of those, we do a lot of hill repeats where I'm asking them to run not at a pace up a hill. I'm asking them to run at a feel, which might be, I'm asking you to run at your 5 minute K pace. What does that feel like when you're running on the flat? And it might be, your 5 minute K pace might be 4:30. I don't want you to run up the hill at 4:30, because that's not capable, because you're running up a hill. So you need to have the same feeling as a 4 minute 30 pace. So that might be 5 minute 10 pace up the hill, but it feels like 4:35K pace. And so get that right, and then watch your strength and endurance just go through the roof. So we've got a variation of some running on the flat where we're running bang on marathon pace. We've got some hill repeats where we're running at faster than marathon pace, but not sprinting.
What feels like your 5K pace, as you said. Yeah, that's
right. And then we would try to do some sub-threshold stuff, which is just under your threshold. So you would be running somewhere between your 10K and your half marathon pace in there, and that is harder than what you're going to experience on race day, but as we always know, when as an example, in a warm-up, if you're going to do a 20-minute time trial on a bike or a 10K run or a 5K run, if you warm up a little bit harder than the actual race, and the warm-up's quite short, where you're doing some 3 by 10 second sprints with 90-second rest, those sprints are there so that when you start the run, the 5K run or the 10K run, the pace seems relatively easy compared to what you just did in those 10-second or 15-second efforts. And I, even when you were a junior, I made you do 2 or 3 200 stride outs. 200-meter stride outs.
Yeah.
And then come the start of the race, you were so warmed up that whatever the intensity of the race was, you were ready to do it. And that's kind of the same analogy we're trying to replicate here, is to try to get you to do some sort of training that's just well above the expectation on race day, so that it feels quite comfortable on race day until 30K or 35K or 41K, hopefully.
That's a great snapshot of the actual training, and I'm conscious of time, but we do want to finish by talking about the actual race itself. And you've spoken a lot about at the start about the how much the race can defeat you, how prepared you have to be mentally and physically. We're talking about the requirements so far in training so that you can actually get through the race. And like you said, get to that 30K mark, get to that 35K mark, and be able to have the strength to keep going. That's what all these sessions are designed to do. So take us through to finish off. What do we need to know about the actual race itself? What are you hammering home to athletes? What are you reminding them of? How do they approach the race and execute and have the best day possible?
Don't have your mates with a bucket of ice. That would be one. But certainly there's so much to say here. It's the preparation, the taper. It's the nutrition during that week, the night before, the morning of, the getting there in the time, being relaxed, being calm, having a race plan. And then there's a race. So the race will pan out this way every single time. There'll be people on the start line who run too fast, who throw you off mentally. And I've already told this story, that Melbourne to Frankston. I think at one point there might have been a Steve Monaghetti equivalent on the start line who is capable of running a 2:06 or whatever. And literally 500 or 600 people kept pace with him in the first 2 or 3K. The only one person who could hold that pace was that guy. The other 600 people were wrong. They were going to run something slower. And some of them were going to run 4 hours, yet they ran 3:03 pace for the first 2 or 3K. So that is not what to do. You need to go in with a clear plan. And I can go and grab my book, which is just right over there in the cupboard, and it'll show me that I was aiming to run 18 minutes 30 per 5K. And that's all I had to worry about. What were my 5K splits? And in order to get those 5K splits, what did I need to run per K? And the big test I had was every 5K, look down, 18 something, and I'm bang on target. So you need to follow that race plan from start to finish. There will be marathon courses where that's harder to do because there's headwind, there's hills, there's downhills, there's sections that are predominantly uphill. So you've got to adapt or adjust your plan according to the course. So it's easy to say that's your plan on a dead flat course with no wind. That's an easy thing, but not a lot of the races are like that. So you actually need to have that scheduled into your race plan. So in order to make the race a successful one, that is the key, is your race plan, and then how can you execute it. If you make mistakes in that execution, then that's going to be the problem. But if you're fit enough to come out of that mistake, you can still save the day. But if you don't realise you've made the mistake till it's too late, then the race is going to have the outcome that you don't want. So in order to get to the finish line with the result you want, the race plan and the execution are all what it's about. And you need to be in the cone of silence and have no one around you except for your body and mind attuned to how am I feeling? Is my pace right? How's my heart rate? Am I feeling comfortable? Is this getting too hard? You're asking yourself these questions every single 20, 30 seconds. Is there someone I can run with who's running the same pace as me? Can I drop in behind them and get a bit of a rest? And then finally, making sure your nutrition is on song and you've practiced that in training, and that will give you the outcome that you want. So have a correct race plan that you've talked about with your coach, that you know is actually real, and you have evidence that you can do those numbers, that pace, and then going out and actually doing it and not getting sucked into people around you running a pace that you think you can sustain because you are so fit and tapered that the first 20K should feel the easiest 20K you've run for a long time. And you should be saying to yourself, I can run faster than this.
It's too slow, yeah.
This is way too slow. I can do better than this. Maybe my plan was wrong. Well, that's not going to be the case in 12K or in 15K time. That's when you need to stand up and be counted and be grateful that you've had a plan and you've stuck to it. Because unlike any other endurance event, and I say this a lot, patience is the key, and to stick with your plan. And if you're patient, you will do that. If you're impatient, you'll get ahead of yourself and risk the consequences of not getting the result you want. But if you want to go for it, and that's what we're trying to do, the time is with 7K to go. At 35K, you think you've got this, then prove it. That's the time to do it, not at 21K.
Yeah, absolutely. That is an absolutely brilliant snapshot of a race plan. And the last question I want you to try and answer is, do you remember, you used the example of Daniel before, in his third year in a row, his third attempt at breaking 3 hours, or maybe it was his fourth one, I think, where he was 20 seconds off his target each time. Do you remember the last thing you said to him, the last bit of advice you gave to him before the race?
That's a really good question. And I think it is, have the confidence in your preparation because you can do this. That is basically what you've got to believe. You've got to believe and trust that you've prepared yourself as best as you can. You have the right program. Believe that you can do it and have the confidence. So we talked about this in the podcast the other day. Confidence is an amazing thing. So you get confidence from some good results coming into the race, and search for those events. Go and do some events where you are in the form of your life if you've trained properly. So go and do a 5K run or whatever's in your program to really, there's nothing like going and doing, for example, we've got 70.3 at Geelong coming this weekend. A couple of guys have gone out and done some FTP tests and they are flying. They have done PBs. What a confidence booster that is coming into the race. And they're just going, bring it on. I can't wait to race because that's the best I've ever done. So go into the race and back yourself in and trust that you've done the work, and you will be fine if you follow the program, the actual race plan.
Brilliant. That was a jam-packed episode. Absolutely unbelievable information in there, and that should prepare anyone as well as they can without spending another 2 hours going into the absolute intricacies. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you've got a marathon coming up, let us know how you go. Let us know how your training's getting on. We hope it helps, and we'll see you in the next episode.